What's up guys, and welcome back to part 2 of the Strapi plus NextJS crash course. I didn't really want to do an introduction, I just wanted to get on with the code, but really quickly, check out Colby Fayak's new crash course on From Design to Development. It's 3.5 hours long, it shows you how to go from Figma all the way to a fully fledged application. I'll leave the link in the description, check it out. For now, let's get back to Strapi. So here we are in a standard NextJS application using the create next app scripts, and we're going to modify this to get it ready to be used with Strapi, next image, and ready to show your amazing blog to all the people that want to see it. So the first things we want to do is install all the packages we're going to be using for this project. So we're going to be using React Markdown, Moment, and React Moment. And we're just using Moment and React Moment for date transformation, so feel free to use something else if you so wish. So let's install those first. So let's do yarn add, and we need Moment, React Moment, and then React Markdown. And those are all the packages we're going to be using for this project. So go ahead, install those, and I'll meet you back with the power of editing. So they've all installed, and this is what your package.json should look like. In your dependencies, you should have Moment, Next, React, React DOM, React Markdown, and React Moment. So now we need to do a few other things. So first, we're going to create a next config.js file, and inside of here, this is how we're going to handle all of our images. And what we need to do is actually denote that we're using the Cloudinary domain. Versus actually using Cloudinary to do the transformation. So all our images are actually going to come from Cloudinary, but we want Next.js to handle it using their built-in image handler with Next10. So to do that, it's just module exports. And then those module exports are going to have images. And inside of that images, we're just going to give it the domains that we're sending. And just for this, we're using res.cloudinary.com. And that's where all our images are going to come from. So you can hit save now, and that takes care of any images that come from Strapi will actually come from this domain. And so we have that, and we have our package JSON set up. And the last thing we want to do is our JS config. So let's do that as well, which will make our development easier in the future. So it's just js config.json. And inside of here, we're going to have compiler options. And then inside of our compiler options, we're going to have base URL, and that will be the root, which in our case is just this, because that is the root of our directory. And then we just need to state our paths that we're going to be using. So paths, and then we're going to have two @/components. And then we need /star here, which transforms into the path of components /star. And then we need one more, which will be our lib folder. So we'll do @/lib/star, and then that will be in .lib. And we can hit save. So we have these as relative paths. So we actually need to create these folders now. So let's create a new folder here called components, and then one also called lib, which will handle all of our requests to Strapi and things like that. So in our components folder, we're going to have a few different components. We're going to have a card. We're going to have a container that handles just the whole thing as a whole, and we can use it wherever we want. We've got the images, a nav bar at the top, then the posts, an SEO section so that we can update our SEO. So when you post out to Twitter, it will use some of the data from the Strapi blog to fill in the missing pieces, so you get a nice display when the Twitter card goes out, or if you're just sharing with friends on Discord, etc. So we have all of those. So in the lib folder itself, we're just going to have two things. We're going to have an API file that takes our API requests from Strapi, and then the second one for media, which handles all our media requests from Strapi as well. So we can use either or as we go along. So let's start with just the API.js file. And what we're going to do here is we're going to export a function out. And this function is essentially just going to be getting the Strapi URL. So we can just type get Strapi URL, and then we're going to put a path here, and we're going to set it to this. And then we're going to return the Strapi URL. Now we're going to have two here. So if you're working in development still and you haven't actually deployed out your Strapi application, we'll use that. But if there's an environmental variable, we'll use that as our Strapi path. So to do that, we can just do a set of backticks. And then we can do process. Oh, that's not the right ones. Process.env.next underscore public underscore Strapi underscore API URL. Or, so the opposite of that is, or we'll just return HTTP localhost. And then Strapi is on 1377. Nice. And then on the outside of that, so outside of these, we need another $, and we're going to do path. And then that will basically create a function that will check to see if we have this. If we do, great, we'll use it. Otherwise, we're going to use localhost every time. And then the path will be added in from us. So now we need a helper function that actually does something. So we can export an async function here that fetches from the API. So we'll call it fetch API, and we'll put in a path here. And you can kind of see where we're going with this. So what we'll do is do const request URL equals, and we'll just put a string here. We'll do const response is equal to an empty string, and then const data is also an empty string. So the way the request URL is going to work is we're just going to go and say get Strapi URL, which is this part up here, and then we're going to pass it in the path. And then for the response, which I did not spell correctly, we're going to take and say await, fetch, and then request URL as such, and we'll just wrap these in our parentheses here. So now what we're doing is saying, hey, get this first, and we'll wait for that to happen. And then we'll fetch this, and then the data that is returned will be an await response.json, and then we'll return the data. So basically this feature here allows us to do one thing. And the one most important thing is always having the same responses every time. So we'll always get a JSON back regardless, versus having to manipulate this later on. We'll always know that the response is going to already be a data JSON. So it makes it easier in the long run to actually edit this in the future. So now we have the API section. We actually should do a one for media. Now, the reason we're doing this is for two reasons. One, we want to be able to handle if the image is local. And then two, we want to be able to handle if the image is from Strapi. So first thing we need to import is actually what we just wrote, which is the get Strapi URL. So we can do get Strapi URL, and that's going to come from /API. And then we can export the function here. And this function is just going to be called get Strapi media, so that we know it's a Strapi request. We can pass in the media, and this is a safety check that I added to this course, which in theory you should never have to actually use, but we're going to use it anyway. And we're just going to say if type of media does not equal undefined, then if the media is not, it equals null, sorry. So if it equals null, what we'll do is we'll just return nothing. And we'll say return nothing. Else we'll do some actual image work here. So we'll just do const image URL equals media.url dot. And then if it starts with this, get Strapi media get Strapi URL media.url. So we're just gonna get this. Otherwise, media.url, and then we'll just return image URL. Okay, so let's talk about this function now. So the first part of it is just essentially us getting the Strapi URL we created in our API, which just gives us the URL. And it says if this type of media does not equal undefined, if the media does equal null, we'll return nothing. Else, we'll get this image. And it basically says if the media starts with a slash, then get this. Otherwise, just return the URL and then return the image URL. So now we have both our API and media done. We need to edit our app.js to handle both the standard head as well as wrapping our requests around so that we can get the Strapi media. So inside of our app.js file, we need to import a few things to make this work and also have the functionality that we want. So first we need to import app, and that comes from next/app, and that allows us to customize this app. Then we need to import head, and that comes from next/head. And then we need to create a context. So to do that, we use create context, and that also comes from React. And then we need to import fetch API, and that comes from what we just created. So if you go back here in our API, we have this fetch API function. So fetch API, and because we've set up JS config now, we can do @/lib and then do API. And then we can import the media. So get Strapi media, and that also comes from @lib/media. And then we can export a constant here, which will be our global context. And that will equal create context. And we'll just put in an empty object for now. So some of that. So now we have this. We basically are going to use just the standard my app, and then we're just going to export it out as normal. But first we need to actually initialize the props. Now, this is probably something you may or may not have seen before, but you can't do get static props inside of here. And there's a big discussion around it. So we're going to use get initial props, which you may not have seen in Next.js before, but it works the same way. Essentially, it's just going to get all of that stuff statically for us. So you're going to do my app dot and then get initial props. And we're just going to say async, and we're going to pass in context here. And that will pass in essentially all this kind of stuff. And then we're going to say const app props equals await app.get initial props. And we're going to pass in the context again. And then we're going to say const global equals await fetch API. So we're going to get something from Strapi here. And we're just going to say /global. And then we're going to return a spreader here. So app props. And then comma page props. And that's going to have global. And then export default. Oh, we need one extra one there. And so what we can do now is we can actually use that in here, because now our page props has this global part, and then the app props is just going to have everything else as it was before. So what we can do now is say, okay, inside of our function here for my app, where we have this component and page props, we can do a const and say global equals page props. And then instead of returning here, we can make a fragment. And then inside of that fragment, first we can have head. And if you've not used head before, essentially this gives you the ability to manipulate the head section of your HTML. So things like titles or the icon that you see when you go to a tab, all those things can be manipulated inside the head. So for us, what we can do here is do link rel equals shortcut icon, and then we can do href here, and we can just ask it to get Strapi media, and then global dot favicon. I can never spell that word. And at that point, like, we're actually passing this in, so it will show up as the icon instead of the default one that we use usually. So now we can use the global context here as part of our wrapper. So we can do global context dot provider, and then the value will be global, which is essentially anything for Strapi we now have here. And then we can take that, and first let me just put the return function here so we don't forget in a second. Okay, that's better. So now what we can do is take this global and say anything wrapped in here will have access to what we want. So now we can do the standard component part with the page providers passed in. So dot dot page props. And then we can close that out and hit save. And now we have this function. Let me just zoom out a little bit here. There we go. So we can sort of talk about everything that's kind of happening in this part. So what we're doing is we're first getting all these initial props. So we're just getting our initial props, which is the application properties from our app here, which is from Next App. So these are the standard features. Then we're getting this global, which is actually a request out to our Strapi URL and getting everything to do with the global part of our requests. Then what we're doing is returning that and page props with this global. So then we get the ability to grab this global from destructuring this page props using global and saying we want to wrap the whole thing around as a global context provider, and now we can use this wherever we want in our application. So that is the beginning part. Now we actually need to do some component work to make this work the way that we want. So let's move on and start creating components. So before we do any component work, we should actually do something with this index file. So first, let's just go ahead and delete all of this out and just leave a single div. And for sakes and purposes, we'll remove that as well. And then what I want to do is actually import the ability to actually fetch from the API. So we need to import fetch API, and that comes from @lib and then API. And this fetch API is going to give us the ability to do our get static props that we want to use. And I wanted to give this first so that you'll understand what parts of the components that we're creating and why we are creating them the way that they are. So what we can do is make multiple calls here to the Strapi API using a promise and use those to create all of our get static props. So we're going to do a function called get static props. We're not going to pass anything in here, but we are going to make 3 different calls. So the first call will be to our articles, one will be to our categories, and then one will be to the home page. And then the way that this works is we're going to do an await, and then we're going to do promise dot all, and then we're going to make 3 calls here. The first call is just going to be fetch API, and then where we need to go, so /articles, so to this articles section, and then we're going to pass it in a query string that says it's published. And then we can copy this fetch API here, paste it 3 times, and then we'll make changes here. So we'll just put a comma here and a comma here. Then the second one to the categories section is just going to be /categories. And then the last one will be /homepage. And then hit save. And then what we want to do is actually return that back. So then we can do return. And then inside of our object, we'll do props. And then those props are going to have the articles, comma, categories, comma, homepage. And then what we want to do is make sure that we revalidate this information. So we're going to use the revalidate one, which means every second that somebody, so let me back up. So every time somebody comes to our homepage, this part of the revalidation will be checked. So what will happen is every second that passes, so let's say you have 500 visitors that all hit at the same time, the first person will be revalidated, and then any subsequent visitors afterwards will get fresh data, but they will never know the difference between the two. So if you turn up and you know your blog post is just posted, it will not show up for you. But then if you do a subsequent visit, it will show up for you. And it gives you the ability to not have to rebuild or do any of that. It's sort of a mix between statically generated sites and having the ability to add some dynamic pieces in by revalidating the code and updating the pages as we see fit. Okay, so now we have this. Now we can do sort of work inside of here, but we're actually going to make all our components to do those kinds of things. But just bear in mind, we now have articles, categories, and home pages, which we should put in up here. So let's do articles, categories, and homepage. And then hit save. So what we're doing is getting this information here all from Strapi. So all of this is coming from Strapi. Then we're going to return it, and we'll use it in our homepage. And then we're saying, hey, we will revalidate this data every second that somebody visits. So let's move on to component. So the first one that we're going to create is a navigation bar. So let's call this component navigation.js. And we're just going to use React. And then we're going to import next link, which is link from next/link. And then we're going to create a constant here called navigation. There we go. And we're actually going to pass in the categories. So what we can do is basically create a navbar that has all the different categories potentially that you could be on your blog. So if someone's looking specifically for your food section, it will show up at the top. And I'm going to do really, really basic CSS here. I'm not going to make anything fancy or anything like that, but this will give you an idea of what you could do with the category section for navigation. And I'm going to leave this completely open for you guys to decide how you want to design your blog, but I'm going to show it in a way that makes sense for all the different pieces. So we have the categories, then we need to return. And what we're going to do is going to create a div here. Then inside of that div, we'll create our nav. Then inside of that nav, we'll create another div. Then we need an unordered list. And the first on the list will be a link. So we're using this next link here, and we're going to say href equals /home. So that basically we just can send them home and say a home. So now we have this link here that will take us to anywhere, from anywhere back to the home page. So we can hit save here. Then right directly underneath that, we're going to do a map over categories. So you're going to do categories dot map, and then we'll call it a category. And then in our arrow function here, we will return. And then inside of that return, we'll do another list item here with a key equal to category.id. And then inside of that, we need our link. So link as equals, and then slash category slash $ category dot slug, and that will give us our slug here. And then the href will be to something that we haven't created yet, but just bear this in mind. It's going to go to slash category slash ID, and then that is the end of that part. And then inside of here, we'll do a link that goes to category dot name, and then hit save. And that will give us everything that we need for our navigation. So let's talk about this one more time. Let me just zoom out a bit further. So we have a const called navigation, which we're going to export out at the bottom. And what we're doing here is we're returning first a unordered list that has the home. And then after our home link, we're going to have a set of categories here. And for each category, we're going to create a new list item that has the link to what we're going to. And the href is going to be to category slash ID, which, as you can see on this pages, we haven't created yet, but we will be creating that in the near future. But I want to make sure that we create all our components the way that I think they should be made. So at this point, we can export default navigation and hit save. And now we have this navigation component that allows us to now create a container component that we can wrap the navigation around. So create a new component here called container.js. And inside of this container, all we're going to do is import navigation, and that can come from /navigation. And then we're going to create a const here called container. And that container is going to equal children, comma, category. So that's what we're going to pass in to this container. And what we're passing in is for both this navigation part, and then we want to display everything else outside of it. So we can just do a slash here, and this fragment will contain our navigation. So we can say navigation categories equals, and then categories. And then we just need to put children underneath, hit save, and that is our container. And then we can export default the container, hit save, and now we can actually use this in here. So if we go back to our index.js page and say, I want to use this, you can just do import container from @/component/container. And then we can just wrap everything in our return here as the container. So we can just do return, and then we can say container, and then we can pass in the categories from here. And these categories will give us everything that we need. And then underneath here, we can just do a div for the sake of time and just write the word title and hit save. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to build this out and then just hit the website, and I'll meet you over there where you can see how it works. So here we are in our web page, and it is ugly, but it does have all the categories that we have for Strapi, and then our title here. And if you can see in the top left-hand corner, this is the Strapi logo that I uploaded in the previous video. So that's what you can see. And what we can actually do really quickly is if you go to my local here and pull out this Heroku and type /global. So this is what's actually being returned in that big global request. It's probably really hard to see. So let's take it from here and we'll just stop our server and create a new file, paste it in, close this out and say, hey, this is a JSON So what's in here is the site name, when it was created, the default SEO. So the default SEO has a blog made with Strapi. This share image is the default. It has no alternative text, and then it has widths and heights. So all of this is basically inside of that global request. And then if we do the same, go back here and type the word /categories, which is what's in the header. This is everything that gets returned in the categories request. And we're using these to populate the heading here. So I have one for news, tech, food, stories, and nature. And that's what's being populated there. So now we know this works. We need to actually do some work below to actually handle this. And when we come back, you'll see this has been styled a different way, so it doesn't look so janky on the screen. But I'm not going to show you how to do CSS. Everyone has their own version. Feel free to check out the GitHub repository below and use that to style your own, or style it however you want with Tailwind or Chakra UI or Semantic UI, whatever you want to use. Vanilla CSS, which is what I'm going to be using. Use that to create your own style. So we're back in the code here, and we need to create another component here called card.js, and that's basically just going to handle how the blog posts are shown on the screen as we go along. So the more blog posts you have, this is kind of where they're all going to show up. So we're going to import React from React. Then we're going to import link, and that's going to come from next/link. And then we're going to import images, and that's going to come from /images. But we haven't created that component yet, but we will do immediately after we finish this one. So what we're going to do is create another const called card. And this card is going to take in all of the articles. So we're going to send in a single article at a time, and we'll map over it in a different part of the component structure. But imagine we're taking in a single article here, and we're going to then pass in the return function, and we're going to say the whole thing wants to be a link. So we'll do link as equals, and then backtick /post/$article.slug. So we're essentially going to take the article and the slug and make that our URL. So /post and then the slug itself. And that's actually going to be something that we'll create as a page in a second. And then the href here will be that structure. So it'll be post/ID. And just like that, that's how we're going to create all of our posts. So let's quickly create two different folders here. So the first one is going to be post. And inside of that post is going to be a new file, and we'll call that slug.js. And then inside of another folder will be category. And inside of that category will also have slug.js. So new file, slug.js. So now we have these two, we can use them in our card here. And we should just change this. Nope, that should be fine. Okay. So inside of the link, we're going to create an A here. And inside of that A, we're going to have a div. And then inside of that div, we'll have another div, because I like to divide things up. And then we're going to have an images, which is this component we haven't created yet. And inside of the images, we're going to pass in the image equals article.image. And so that's going to give us like the sort of header section of an image. So imagine you see the image here, then maybe a title, and then like read more, click the button kind of thing. So that takes care of our image. And then inside of our like body section of the card, we'll create a p tag here. And this p tag is going to be the title. So let's give this the article.title. And then underneath that P, we'll have another P here, and that'll be the category name. So we'll do article.category.name. And then we'll hit save. And then that will take care of essentially showing an image and then the title and then what category it is so they can see all of those differently. So now we need to create this images component. So let's do that next. So let's create a file here called images.js. Now this images.js is essentially going to use NextImage to handle displaying of images and make sure they're optimized for different sizes, etc. So we're going to import the get Strapi media, and that's coming from /lib and then media. And then we're going to import image from NextImage. And then we can now create a const images. And then the images is going to take in 2 components, but we're only going to use one of them. I'm going to leave the other one up to you. Essentially, it's just the styles, but we'll add it into our image and you can add styles on the other side. So the way that this kind of works is we're going to pass in the image here and then obviously the style if we so wish. And then we're going to take the image URL, which is going to come from the image. So we're going to equal get Strapi media image as such, and then that will give us the URL, and then we can return, and then inside of this return we can do an image, and then we need all the different details, but let's just self-close it for now. And then we're going to need the source, and the source is going to be equal to image URL. Then we need the alt, which is either going to be image.alternative text, or we can just use the image.name. So whichever one of those, it will always be something. Then if you've not used NextImage before, you have to set the width and the height. Now, one option you could do is do a style and then import that in here. And that's entirely up to you. But we're just going to set some defaults here for all images. So the height and the width is there. Then we can do layout is equal to in strings, that one. Can never say it, but that one essentially allows it to resize, but not resize too far. Then the loading, we'll just set it to lazy. And then we'll add one more, which is style, and we'll equal that to style. And that's if you want to add any more styling to your images, you can pass that in as a final piece. So that's all that we need to do for images. So we can just do export default images and then hit save. So now we have a card that handles a single article, and we can use it multiple times. And then we also have this images component now that allows us to pass in the image and have it optimized by Next.js, making it lightning fast. So the final part that we really need is some way to actually have posts. So let's create a post component here. And this post component is essentially going to take that card that we just created and use that and map over it to make a grid of images. So to do that, you can do import React from React. And then we're going to import the card again from, we can just do /card. And then we can say const posts equals, and then all we're going to pass in this time is articles, which if you remember from the beginning, we have this section here called articles that we're currently not using. So we're going to take that and we're going to put that in here. So that's what we're going to pass in here. So what we need to do is say we want to return a div to hold everything in place. And then we'll have one more div, and then we'll say articles.map article. And then inside of our mapping, we'll just return a card, and the card will take an article, which is this. And then we also will create a key here, and we'll call the key equal to set of backticks, and we'll call it article underscore $ article dot slug. And we'll close that out, and then we'll hit save. And now we should have a fully completed set of posts that we can then export default posts. So what we're doing here, just to cover it one more time, is we're importing this card functionality. We're going to get the articles from here in our get static props. And then we're going to return a card of each article, and the key, which is important part of when you do a map over, is going to be article underscore article slug. And then that will allow us to now create something in our index.js to essentially show all of these out. So what we can do here is inside of here, instead of having this div inside a container, what we can do is say, okay, we'll have a single div, and then inside of that div, we'll have a separate div, which will be our container. So I'll just give it a class name of container so you understand what it's for. Container. And then inside of there, we'll have an h1, and this h1 will just be the title. So to get that, we can use homepage, which is here, .hero.title. And we'll close that out. And that is coming from, if you remember originally, the homepage is /homepage. So let's quickly test it out by going here and type in /homepage and see what comes back. So the homepage gives you the SEO, and essentially in here is the title, so my personal Strapi blog, a meta description, a share image, and then different versions of that share image, and also the provider is Cloudinary because that's where we're getting our images from. So now we have that. We can then go back to this page here and say, under our H1, we want posts, which is this components post here, and say we want that to be articles equal to the articles that we're passing in. And now if we hit save here, now we can load up NextJS again and take a look and see what happens when we load this. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so here we are, we're back. I kind of made this weird looking nav bar, which is responsive, sort of. And then down here we have a couple of blog posts that we have, and they are clickable. And if we click them, we'll get an error message that says, this doesn't exist. Hey man, like, you know, what are you doing? So yeah, but we do have a working navbar, and then we are importing our posts from Strapi. So now we need to go back and fix that by creating a post section in our slug that will handle when we click this button. We need React Markdown to sort of make all our stuff look semi-pretty. And then obviously we also need to fix categories. Because if I click this category right now, nothing kind of happens, and we error out and go back to this page. But when we click this, we want to be able to see all of the blog posts with that category. So let's go back into our code and make a few more changes. So we're back in the code, and we need one more thing before we can create our post slug and our category slug, and that is SEO. SEO is super important in a blog, and sometimes it can be quite a pain to handle. So we're going to make an SEO component that you can just basically pass stuff in, and it will do the rest for us. So we need to import head from next head, and then we're going to import use context, and that's going to come from React. And then we're going to import that global context that we created in the beginning. So to do that, it's global context from pages, /_app. And then we need to import the Strapi media. So it's get Strapi media, and that's going to come from at lib media. And then we can create a const here called SEO. And we'll call, what we're going to pass in is also something called SEO. And then inside of here, we'll do some stuff. And then just to make sure that we export these out, let's export default SEO and then hit save. So how this is essentially going to work is we're just basically going to give it everything that we need, including our default SEO and site name. So inside of our app.js right now, you can see here that we essentially have this global that basically handles all different types of data, and we can use that to essentially create a way of passing all this data back and forth. So in our SEO file here, we can create a constant here, and we're going to destructure two things, the default SEO and then site name. And we can just set that from the used context and then global context. Then we can say SEO with defaults. SEO with defaults equals a spreader here and say default SEO, comma, SEO. And that will give us our essential defaults. And then we can say const full SEO equals the spreader again with SEO with defaults, comma. And then we need things like the meta title and the share image. So we can do meta title, and that's going to be an object here. We use backticks, and it's just going to be $, and then SEO with defaults dot meta title. And then if that is not available, we'll use site name. So one or the other is going to be available. And then we're going to create a share image. And the share image essentially gives us the ability to, as you can think of, share an image every time we share a post. And by default, it will be one thing, and then we can change it as we go. So it's another $, and we'll do get Strapi media first. And then SEO with defaults dot share image. And then that will give us the ability to always have something. Like, we don't want a horrible like Twitter share where we forgot to upload an image and it comes up with those horrible gray lines that everybody sees and they get frustrated and can't understand why they're not getting what they want when they share an image out. And this is to handle all of that so that when you do share on Twitter, it will look sweet and people will want to click on it. So now what we need to return is the head. And inside of that head is where all our SEO is going to be done. So we're going to use full SEO dot meta title and then use the and symbol, and that's a way to make sure there's actually something there. And then we'll create a partial here, and this partial is going to have essentially a way of us sharing different parts of this out. So if there is this, then what we want to do is put the title, and the title is going to be full SEO.meta title. As such, like that. And then we need the meta property for OG title and then the Twitter title. So the ways that those work is you do meta property equals, and then what we're going to be doing. So it will be OG title, and then content will equal this. So we can just copy and paste this out. And that gives us that one. Then we can copy and paste this meta title here and change the property from property to name and then OG title to Twitter title. And that gives us the first part. Then we need to copy and paste this down. And this is why people don't like SEO, because it's a lot of busy work. So we're going to do this once, and then we can use it wherever, and then we never have to worry about it again, which is the developer's dream, right? We just don't want to have to worry about this. And once we've done it once, we can do it again. So if you copy this down, one more, and change meta title to meta description, and that will give us basically a description of what's happening. And then the meta is going to be slightly different. So we're going to get another meta name here, copy this one and drop it here. And the first meta name will just be description. And then the content here will just be meta description. So we're using this. And then the second one will be OG description. So instead of OG title, it'll be OG description. And that will have the same content. And then the last one will be Twitter description. So we can just copy this, put it here, and then make sure we get this and drop it in here. And then we can copy this one down, and then we'll just make 2 copies because that's how many are left. So now we need share image. So change this to share image. And then this one will be OG image. And that's actually going to be a property this time. And the content will be this. And then the next one will be a name. And that one will be Twitter. .image. And we can take this again and drop it here. And then the last one will also be a name, and it's just going to be image. And then the content will be the same. So we can just drop that here. And that takes care of that. And then our final piece here is, we still need this part, but what we need to do is change this to article. And then we're going to do an @ here, and then we're going to do another set of meta property, and we're going to equal this to OG type, then content equals article, so that basically the SEO knows that this is an article, which is important for your blog post. And then underneath that, we just need to do a meta name equal to Twitter card. And that is going to have content equals summary. Man, I can't spell today. Summary underscore large underscore image. And that will give us a nice shareable card on Twitter. Whew, that was a lot, right? So let's just talk about it one more time so we understand exactly what happens here. So this part of the original is coming from our global context. So if you go back to this app.json, we're basically getting all of this data from this global, which we're going to pass to our SEO. And then we're going to have a default SEO and then the SEO. The SEO we can pass in parts of our application as we see fit. Then inside the head, we're going to return all these different datas. So the title is going to be for both the OG title and the Twitter title. Then we're going to show the meta description and then the image. And then finally, we're going to tell it it's an article. Okay, so now we have the way to show SEO. We can finally move on to creating our posts, which is pretty important. So we're going to import React Markdown from React Markdown. We're also going to import Moment from React-Moment. And that's going to be a way to just, like I said previously, handle the date and format it in a way that's readable versus a date timestamp. Then we need to import Fetch API. And that's going to come from our lib/API. And then we need the container from container. And you can see how easy setting a JS config is, because now all my imports are quick. I don't have to remember how many slashes I need. I can just type in what I want, and it will always show the right one. And then finally we need this from here. And then we can import, actually let me move this import here. Get Strapi media, and we'll get that from @lib/API. So now we've imported everything that we need. We can do a const here called post. And what we're going to pass in is two pieces of information, the article and the categories. Okay. And then we should export this default so I don't forget. So at this point, we're going to get the URL for the image first, and we're going to get that, and then we're going to give it some SEO. So we can just do const image URL equals get Strapi media, and then article.image. Then we can do our SEO, so we can just do const SEO is equal to, and then basically we can take stuff from the article and put it in here, sprinkle it on top, and that will give it everything that we need. So we can do meta title, and we can set that to article.title. Then we can set the description that we just set up, so meta description, and we can do article.description. Then we can do share image and set that to article.image. And then finally, we can just tell it article is true. And then that means that we know this is an article and not a different kind of SEO required. Now we can actually return some cool stuff. So we can do a return here, and we'll get our container here and say categories is equal to categories. So we have that. Then we can do, inside of here, we can just do the SEO. So SEO is equal to SEO. So now we have basically, from the beginning, we already have a container that contains our navbar, and we've already done all the SEO. So we're already 55 million% better than most blogs, because we have our SEO done and we have a way to do our categories. So then what we can do from there is create a title. So we can do h1, and then we can do article.title and wrap that in a set of curly braces, and then we can go from there. So let's first just wrap this in a div. And then underneath this, we'll create another div. And then we're just going to use React Markdown. So there's not going to be a lot of work for us here. So we can just use React Markdown and say source is equal to article.content. And then we can just say escape HTML is false. And that basically takes care of our whole blog post. And then the only other thing that we can do here, which is why we're using moment and stuff like that, we can create a div. And then we can map over the author picture, essentially, and use that as a way to show like who created this. So we can do article.author.picture. And then if it's there, we can do images. So we can use our fantastic image component here. And then we can just say image equals article.author.picture. And then underneath this part, we can do another div here and just say key, and then just say by, and then author oh, I'm sorry, article.author.name. And then underneath that, we can use moment to create a nice date format. So we can just do article.published at is what we need. So published _at. And then we can just do the moment section here. So we do moment, and then format is equal to, and then we tell it the format. So we're going to do MMMDO year. And then we can just put this part inside and then hit save. So at this point, we should be ready to basically use all of this in such a way. So first, let's actually use this image URL somewhere else. So I was just going to leave it as just the share image, but we can probably stick this above our title here. So let's do that. So let's create another image here using our images, and we'll just say image equals, and then article dot image, and then close that out like that, and then at least we'll have the image. So the last part that we actually need to do is to actually create static paths. So the way that this works is essentially you're going to create a way for NextJS to know how to create all these different posts. So we're going to use two different functions here. We're going to have async function get static paths, and then we're going to have another function called get static props. So export async function get static props, and the get static props is going to take params as the argument. And then essentially what we're going to do here is do two different requests. So the first request here for get static props, essentially what we're going to do is we're going to fetch the basically all the article data, and we're going to pass that up in here. And then the second static path is essentially a way for us to map out everything and let them know whether or not it's going to work the way that it should. So for get static props, what we're going to do is we're going to create the articles, and we're going to equal that to await fetch API. And then the fetch API is going to need a URL. So we're going to need articles, and then we can pass in a slug through a string query. So it's going to be slug equals, and then $params.slug. And then we need to set it to make sure that the status is equal to published, because we don't want people to see unpublished work, even though some of my best work is unpublished. And then we need the categories. So in similar fashion, we're just going to do categories is equal to await fetch API, and then just do /categories. And then we need to return those. So just do return, and then props. And the props is going to take articles, and the articles first result is going to be what we want. So 0, and then comma categories. And then we're going to ask it to revalidate 1. And you're probably wondering, like, why would you want to revalidate? And that's obviously so that we have the freshest data every time somebody visits. Similar to the homepage, we want them to have the freshest data. For example, if you made a change to an article, we'd want it to show up. And the only way to do that is either to rebuild the website or revalidate the website and have it come back. So then we need the static paths here. So what we can do is do await fetch API, and then we're just going to pass in articles. And essentially what it's going to do is it's going to know that every URL that we hit is going to have a static path. So essentially what's going to happen is going to build every single blog post that you have. And to do that, we need to return And inside the return, we're going to have paths, and that's going to be articles.map, article, and then inside of there, we're going to have params, and the params is just going to be the slug. So it's slug, and then article.slug. And then just outside of our params, we're going to essentially set this part to have a fallback, and the fallback is going to be set to false. And then let's see where we messed up here. So we have return, which is set one. Yep, okay, that part's right. And then pass articles.map, parentheses. Oh, I missed an additional one of those. There we go. So yeah, so what's going to happen here is this is going to create essentially the parameters that we can pass in here. We're going to use this slug to do all of our work. Okay, so now at this point, we're ready to actually look at what happens when we click on a blog post. So I'll meet you back over on the web app so we can see what happens. Okay, so we're back in our not so great looking blog, but obviously I'll leave all the CSS to you. But as you can see, we have the internet's own boy, we have a title, and they're different sizes. So React Markdown is working as expected. And then at the bottom, we have who it's by and the date. So everything is working here. And the last thing we need to do is fix this, our categories. We want someone to be able to click on that and then be able to use the categories to do something. So let's go ahead and create our categories so that we can have a fully functioning site. Okay, so for categories, we're going to import posts from our containers. So at component/posts. We're going to import the fetch API. And that's going to come from there. And then we're going to import the container from container. And we're going to import SEO from SEO. So we're going to create a const here called category. And the way that this is going to work is we're going to pass in the category, comma, categories. So we're going to take two parameters here, category, comma, categories. I'm going to use those to do some work. So in similar fashion, we're going to need static paths and static properties again. So we can do an export async function. And we're going to take get static paths, and then we're going to have one for static properties. So get static props. And we're going to pass in params as we did last time. And inside of our static paths, essentially we're going to ask for all categories. So const categories equals await fetch API / categories. And then we're going to return back the paths. And the paths in this case are going to be categories.map. And then we're going to take the category and inside of that, we're going to take each category and return it as a parameter. So params is going to be slug, comma, category dot slug. And then outside of this part, we're just going to say fallback is false. And then inside of here, we can just use this parameter. So we can say category. So that will be a single category. We can say await fetch API. And then we're going to pass in backticks here and say categories / slug equals params.slug. So essentially we're asking for the first one here. So after our set of parentheses here, we can say 0. And this will just give us the first result. And then we can say categories, and we can just ask for all of the categories again. So you just do fetch APIs, and then categories. And then what we return here is props. And then the props is going to be category, comma, categories. And then we can just ask it again to revalidate. So we have the latest data. So revalidate 1. And then let's just make sure we export default category. So now we know what we're going to get here. And now we just need to fill out our section around returning some details around categories. So what we're going to do is take the SEO first. So the SEO is just going to be meta title. And the meta title is going to be equal to the category.name. So the single category name. And then the description is going to be all, and then category.name posts. So we're basically just telling it that like this is all of our posts for the single type of category. Then our return functionality here, wrap it in the container, and the categories are going to equal categories. And then inside of that is where we're going to just display all the posts. So we can do SEO is equal to SEO. And then we can do a div. And then inside of that div, we'll have another div. And then inside of that div, we'll have an H1 that will give you the category dot name. And then underneath the H1, we'll do posts articles equals category dot articles. And that will give us every single post in a category and show them and allow the user to navigate to them and do whatever they want. So I'll meet you back on the Next.js side where we take a look at this categories. Okay, so we're back on the home page. If we click news, now we get all the categories with news. If I click tech, in theory, I should get all the ones for tech if there are any. There aren't. But if we do one for food, there's not any there. What about story? Doesn't seem to be any for story. And then finally, nature. And when we click nature, we get the other one. And then if we click one of these, it should take us back to the post and we can see it there. So that's everything. Now we have Strapi running, Next.js with static props, static paths. We're using API requests and everything like that. So if you did enjoy this and you want to see more of this kind of stuff where I show you how to set it all up and let you free flow the CSS, please leave a like. Please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment about what you want to do in the future, whether it's Shopify and Next.js or Next.js and FaunaDB with authentication, anything that you want. Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, see ya.